Welcome to this explainer. I got to start off today with a bit of a confession. When it comes to sterile processing, it is just incredibly easy to assume that the standard US model, we're talking the ANSI and AMI standards, the Joint Commission guidelines, that this is just the universal reality of how things are done everywhere. We kind of fall into the trap of thinking our way is the only way. But today, we are going to completely shatter that assumption. We're going to take a look at how the rest of the world handles the exact same life-saving instruments that we do.
So, is the US way the only way? Well, no way. Absolutely not. Okay, let's dive into this. When you actually start talking to medical technicians internationally, you have this massive realization. There are 155 countries out there, all sharing this one core mission of patient safety. But they have wildly different, and in some cases, highly advanced, systems for medical device reprocessing. The US model is just one approach. It's got real strengths for sure, but in many areas, other countries are doing things that we should seriously be looking at and, honestly, learning from.
So here is our global flight itinerary for today. Number 1, Germany, the gold standard. Number 2, the UK, tracking and traceability. Number 3, a global reality check. And number 4, Australia, professional recognition. Let's hit stop number 1, Germany, the gold standard.
Okay, so when it comes to medical device reprocessing, Germany has established itself as an absolute gold standard. Why? Because their systems are remarkably rigorous and highly prescriptive. Here in the United States, we rely pretty heavily on voluntary guidance documents from organizations like AMI or ANSI, and we focus heavily on complying with the manufacturer's instructions for use, or IFUs. But Germany? They take a completely different path. Over there, medical device reprocessing is governed by legally binding DIN and EN ISO standards. The Robert Koch Institute actually mandates full machine validation in writing. It's not just, hey, follow the instructions. It is, prove your entire process works and prove it to the letter of the law.
And this legal rigor, it feeds directly into the people actually doing the work. Now, brace yourselves. There is an incredibly long, very German word for this. Fachkraft für Medizinprodukteaufbereitung. This translates to a formal, regulated specialist qualification for medical device reprocessing. I love this because it brilliantly illustrates how deeply the European culture values this clinical role. It's not just some entry-level hospital job. It is a highly specialized, totally recognized profession.
In practice, this builds into a formalized, multi-tier qualification pathway. It's like a highly structured ladder. You start with Step 1, base training. Then, as you move to Step 2, you enter increasing tiers of responsibility. Finally, Step 3 is a fully regulated professional qualification. In the US, while certification is incredibly important, it's still largely voluntary and, let's be honest, a bit of a state-by-state patchwork. But in Germany, this tiered certification is an operational, legal requirement built right into the healthcare infrastructure from day one.
Moving right along to Section 2, the UK, tracking and traceability.
Crossing the channel into the United Kingdom, we find a massive, centralized healthcare system, the National Health Service, or the NHS. In this system, sterile processing practices are governed by health technical memoranda, specifically one called HTM 01-01. But the reason their tracking protocols are just so intense is tied to a very specific historical event. You see, the UK's entire approach was heavily shaped by the 1990s BSC outbreak, what most of us commonly call mad cow disease, and the resulting variant CJD concerns. Prion diseases are notoriously difficult to eradicate from surgical instruments, so the NHS basically had to completely overhaul how they manage risk.
Because of that history, instrument-level traceability is deeply embedded in NHS practice as this active, unbroken journey. Picture this. An instrument is used on patient A in the OR, it is scanned on exit, tracked through decontamination, tracked into the specific sterilizer load, and finally tracked all the way to patient B. Every single step and every single patient is completely linked and fully traceable.
So why does going to all this trouble matter so much? Well, because without this exact data, you're manually reconstructing a total nightmare. Imagine if a hospital ever needs to do a look-back investigation. Say an infection is detected, and they urgently need to know exactly who else was exposed to a specific surgical instrument. The UK system has that data ready to go instantly. Without that rigorous tracking, finding the source of an infection is practically impossible.
All right, Section 3, the global reality check.
So far, we've looked at two highly resourced, high-income nations. But to truly understand global sterile processing, we've got to step outside that bubble and look at the sobering reality in places like Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of Latin America. In many low-resource settings, the standard sterile processing infrastructure that we just completely take for granted, it simply does not exist. Healthcare workers are literally forced to boil instruments in pots of water. They use alcohol flames to sterilize tools. They have to rely on small, unvalidated benchtop sterilizers pushed way, way beyond their parameters, simply because there is absolutely no alternative. And yet, patients are still having surgeries in these facilities every single day.
And the consequences of this, they are measurable. And honestly, they're devastating. To put it in perspective, World Health Organization data shows that surgical site infection rates are 2 to 5 times higher in low-income countries compared to high-income ones. The gap between a well-run sterile processing department and having virtually no infrastructure at all isn't just a minor inconvenience. It is a literal life-and-death issue on a massive population scale.
I really want this next point to stick with you. The work U.S. techs consider completely routine is a privilege. It is a standard that millions of patients around the world simply don't have access to. When we talk about why this profession matters, it is not some abstract concept. The ability to guarantee a clean, sterile instrument is an incredible medical privilege. It's a foundational pillar of global health that millions are currently fighting to achieve.
Which brings us to Section 4, Australia, Professional Recognition.
For our final destination, we're heading down under to Australia, where the AS/NZS 4187 standards govern the reprocessing of reusable medical devices. But what is truly fascinating here isn't just the technical specs, it is the powerful contrast in professional framing. Think about it. In the US, sterile processing is all too often framed as a support service, or, totally unfairly, the cleanup crew. But in Australia, they have a really strong tradition of viewing their central sterilizing supply departments as genuine clinical units. Technicians are viewed as CSSD specialists. They're seen as clinicians with a vital specialty, not just ancillary basement workers.
And words matter, right? Because this shift in framing changes the actual reality on the ground. By treating sterile processing as a clinical specialty, Australia sees a tangible, real-world impact. We're talking increased staffing ratios, higher pay scales, significantly greater investment in training, and an elevated professional standing within the entire hospital. When you respect the work as a clinical necessity, the whole infrastructure around it rises to match that respect.
Okay, Section 5, Lessons for US Techs.
So we've traveled the globe today. We've seen German laws, UK traceability, the heartbreaking realities of low-resource areas, and Australian clinical respect. What does this all mean for clinical professionals right here at home? Well, the biggest takeaway is this: reframe your context. Understand your exact role in the much bigger picture. When you see that other countries have made formal technician qualifications the actual law, and when you realize how desperately other parts of the world need the infrastructure you work in every single day, it radically changes your professional context. You aren't just washing tools. You are a critical linchpin in a highly advanced healthcare system.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. The U.S. sterile processing community is one of the most well-resourced in the world, but are we building the infrastructure this work truly deserves? Are we using our immense resources to advocate for mandatory training, bulletproof tracking, and the clinical respect this life-saving profession demands? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, keep advocating for your profession, and I will see you in the next one.